Welcome to Family Betrayal Revenge. Stay tuned. Have a fun time and let's talk in the comment. Let's go!
6 months ago, my apartment burned down, and I lost everything I owned in 7 years. When I called my parents desperate and broken, my stepfather said 5 words I'll never forget. Not our problem. Be more careful. Then the insurance company told me my parents were listed as beneficiaries on a policy I never signed. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments. And I will give you a heart. I'm Rachel Miller, 29 years old, and 6 months ago, I woke up to the smell of smoke so thick I could taste it before my brain even registered what was happening. The smoke alarm was screaming at 3:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because when I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, that glowing screen showing 3:17 a.m. was the last thing I saw clearly before everything became darkness and chaos, and the kind of terror that makes your body move before your mind catches up. The smoke wasn't just in my bedroom. It was everywhere, pouring under the door, filling the hallway, turning the air into something solid and wrong, acrid and chemical, the kind of smell that burns your throat and makes you understand instantly that you're not supposed to be breathing this, that this air wants to kill you. I couldn't think. My hand found my phone and I ran, barefoot in my thin cotton pajamas with my hair still in the braid I'd put it in before bed. I hit the stairwell door so hard my shoulder would bruise purple and yellow for weeks afterward, for flights down. Each step a prayer I didn't know I was praying, each breath a knife cutting deeper into my lungs. And when I finally burst through the lobby door onto the February sidewalk, the cold air hit me like a physical slap, shocking and brutal, and the most beautiful thing I'd ever felt because it meant I was alive. I was outside, I was still breathing. I stood there on the concrete in my bare feet, the cold burning the soles almost as badly as the smoke had burned my lungs, shivering in pajamas that were never meant to protect anyone from a Chicago winter night, watching flames lick out of the 4th floor window that had been my bedroom 30 minutes ago. Unit 4B, the place I'd called home for 7 years, the place where I'd learned to be an adult, where I'd celebrated promotions and cried over breakups, where I'd hung curtains and painted walls and built a life that felt like mine. All of it burning, all of it turning to smoke and ash while I stood on the sidewalk clutching a phone and wearing nothing else. A firefighter approached me, his face grim beneath his yellow helmet, soot already streaking across his cheeks even though they'd barely started fighting the blaze. "Ma'am," his voice was kind but firm. "Are you the resident of 4B? I nodded because words wouldn't come. My throat was too raw, my brain too scrambled, and he looked at me with a kind of expression that told me he'd done this before, had delivered bad news to people in pajamas too many times to count. "I'm sorry," he said, and he didn't look away when he said it, which somehow made it worse. "Everything in that unit is gone. The fire started in your bedroom, near the electrical outlet behind your dresser. We got here as fast as we could, but the damage..." He paused. "There's nothing salvageable. I'm sorry. Gone." The word didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. 7 years of my life were in that apartment. The photo albums from college that I'd never gotten around to digitizing. The guitar my late father had given me when I was 16, the week before he died, with my name engraved on a silver plate on the back. Every birthday card my grandmother had sent me since I moved out, my college diploma in its frame, my laptop with every design project I'd ever worked on, every memory, every password, every piece of evidence that I existed as the person I'd become since leaving my mother's house. All of it smoke, all of it ash, all of it gone like it had never mattered at all. I sank down onto the curb, legs giving out, still holding my phone like it was a life preserver in an ocean that was trying to drown me. The screen still showed 3:47 a.m., 30 minutes since I'd woken up, 30 minutes since my entire life had been intact. Around me, neighbors were gathering in robes and slippers and winter coats thrown over pajamas, murmuring to each other, looking at me with the kind of pity that makes you feel even more alone. Someone draped a blanket over my shoulders. Scratchy wool that smelled like mothballs. I don't remember who. Couldn't look up to see their face. Couldn't do anything except stare at my phone and realize that I needed to call someone, needed to tell someone what had happened, needed help because I had nowhere to go, nothing to wear, nothing to my name except a phone and pajamas and burned lungs. My hands were shaking when I pulled up my contacts, scrolled to Mom, to the woman who'd raised me, who was supposed to love me unconditionally, who was supposed to be the person you called when everything fell apart. I pressed call and listened to it ring. One ring, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 rings before she finally picked up, and when she did her voice was thick with sleep and something else, something sharp underneath. Rachel. She said my name like an accusation. Do you know what time it is? Mom. My voice cracked, broke completely. There was a fire in my apartment. Everything is gone. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anything except my phone, Mom. I need... Oh. She interrupted me, and that one syllable carried a pause that stretched too long, a silence that felt like distance, like doors closing, like something fundamental shifting. That's unfortunate, Rachel. That's really unfortunate. Unfortunate. The word hung in the air between us. Unfortunate, like I'd missed a bus, like I'd forgotten an appointment. Like this was an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe, like my entire life hadn't just burned down while I ran for my life. I heard rustling on her end of the phone, heard my stepfather Gerald's voice in the background asking what was wrong, heard my mother's muffled response. Then Gerald's voice came through the phone, sharp and cold and utterly final. Rachel, what's this? About a fire? I told him again, had to push the words past the raw burning in my throat, the fire, the smoke, standing on the sidewalk with nothing, needing help, needing somewhere to go, needing my parents to be parents, and his response came back so fast and so flat that I knew with absolute certainty that he'd already made this decision, had already calculated the cost of helping me and decided it wasn't worth it. This isn't our problem, Rachel, he said, his tone the same one he used to discuss taking out the trash or paying bills. You should have been more careful. You're an adult now. You need to handle your own situations. We can't be expected to drop everything because you had an accident. An accident, like I'd spilled coffee, like I'd dented my car, like I hadn't just lost everything I owned while barely escaping with my life. The line went dead before I could respond, before I could process what had just happened, before I could understand that my parents, the people who were supposed to catch you when you fell, had just told me to figure it out alone. I sat there on that curb with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air, listening to nothing. Watching firefighters pour water onto what used to be my home while my parents slept soundly in their house 40 minutes away, not coming, not helping, not caring enough to even pretend they might. The sun started to rise eventually, painting the smoke that still poured from broken windows a sickly orange color. Neighbors drifted back inside to their intact apartments, their intact lives. The firefighters kept working, but the urgency had passed. Now it was just cleanup. Just making sure the fire didn't spread, just containing damage that had already been done. And I sat on that curb wrapped in a stranger's blanket, realizing with perfect, horrible clarity that I had been alone for a long time. I just hadn't known it until now. My parents hadn't asked if I was hurt, hadn't asked if I needed a place to stay, hadn't asked if I was okay. They'd heard that I'd nearly died, and their response was not our problem. Be more careful. And somewhere underneath the shock and grief and exhaustion, something else was starting to form, something harder, something that felt like the beginning of a question I didn't want to ask. A memory surfaced through the smoke and trauma, my mother standing in my apartment 5 days ago, her first visit in almost 2 years. She'd shown up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, said she'd been in the neighborhood and wanted to see me, wanted to spend some time together. And I'd been so surprised, so pathetically grateful for the attention, that I hadn't questioned it. Hadn't wondered why, after 2 years of barely speaking, she suddenly wanted to tour my apartment. Hadn't thought it was strange when she'd walked through every room, touching things, opening closets, asking about my electrical setup, asking if I had renter's insurance, asking questions that at the time seemed like normal mom concern, but now, sitting on this curb at dawn, seemed like something else entirely. She'd stayed for 3 hours, I remembered now. 3 hours when she'd said she could only stop by for a few minutes. She'd brought a large black bag, said it had gifts she'd been meaning to give me, but when she left the bag was gone and I never saw what was in it. Never asked because I was just so happy she'd visited, so desperate for any scrap of maternal attention that I'd accepted everything at face value, hadn't questioned, hadn't doubted, had just been grateful, and now that gratitude felt like ash in my mouth. Tasted like the smoke still coating my throat, because why had she really come? Why after 2 years? Why 5 days before my apartment burned down in a fire that started near an electrical outlet? Why? Have you ever had that moment where something clicks into place and you realize you've been living in a story you didn't write? where you suddenly see the pattern you missed because you were too close to it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from tonight, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know that someone else has felt this particular kind of cold realization. This understanding that the people who are supposed to protect you might be the ones you need protection from. And if you've ever called your parents in a crisis only to hear them say it's not their problem, type the words "not alone" below, because neither am I, neither are any of us who've learned the hard way that DNA doesn't guarantee love. I pushed the thought away, told myself I was being paranoid, told myself that trauma and shock were making me suspicious of innocent coincidence, told myself that my mother wouldn't, couldn't, would never, but the question wouldn't leave. It sat in my chest next to my damaged lungs, heavy and undeniable, asking itself over and over. Why had she visited after 2 years of silence? Why had she stayed so long? Why had she asked so many questions? Why had my apartment burned down 5 days later? And why, when I called desperate and terrified, had my parents responded like I was an inconvenience rather than their daughter? A coworker saved me that first morning. Marcus Chen from the design team had driven past on his way to an early meeting, saw the fire trucks, saw me on the curb, and pulled over without hesitation. "Rachel," he called out, running across the street still in his suit jacket. "What happened? Are you okay?" And when I told him, when the words had finally come, he just wrapped his coat around me over the blanket and said, "Come stay with me. I have a spare room. You can stay as long as you need. No questions, no conditions, just stay." And I'd cried then, finally cried, because a coworker was offering me more care in 5 minutes than my parents had offered in 30, because kindness from a relative stranger hurt worse than coldness from family, because it proved that what my parents had done wasn't normal, wasn't acceptable, wasn't something I had to accept as just how things were. Marcus drove me to his apartment, let me shower the smoke smell off my skin, gave me clothes his sister had left behind, made coffee and toast, and sat with me while I stared at nothing, processing nothing, just existing in the aftermath. And 3 days later, when I'd finally gathered enough pieces of myself to function again, I called my renter's insurance company, expecting bureaucracy, expecting forms and waiting periods, and the usual corporate runaround. But what I got instead was a question that made everything worse, that made the paranoid suspicions crystallize into something sharp and terrible and real. "Ms. Miller, can you confirm your relationship to Gerald and Patricia Miller?" the customer service representative had asked, his voice careful, professional, and I'd said they're my parents, my mother and stepfather. "Why are you asking?" And the silence that followed was too long, too heavy, too full of something I couldn't name yet, but could feel like ice spreading through my veins. "Ms. Miller," he'd said finally, "I think you need to come to our office. There's something you should see." And I'd asked, "Can't you just tell me over the phone?" And he'd said, "No, I really think this needs to be in person. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" And I'd said yes, because what else could I say? What else could I do except follow the thread that was unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family, about my safety, about whether the people who raised you could also be the people who destroyed you. And as I hung up that phone call, sitting in Marcus's spare room wearing his sister's borrowed clothes, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever I was about to learn at that insurance office was going to confirm what I'd been trying not to believe, that my mother's visit hadn't been coincidence, that the fire hadn't been an accident, that my parents' coldness hadn't been callousness but calculation, and that the question wasn't whether they'd done something terrible. The question was how much I'd be able to prove, and what it would cost me to try. The insurance office smelled like stale coffee and the kind of air freshener that tries too hard to cover up the scent of desperation. I walked in at 9 a.m. still wearing Marcus's sister's borrowed jeans and a sweater that was too big, carrying a folder with a few documents I'd been able to gather, my driver's license that had been in my phone case, a printed copy of my lease that my landlord had emailed me, evidence that I existed, that I'd had a life before it burned. Greg Thompson was younger than he'd sounded on the phone, maybe 35, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of apologetic expression that people wear when they're about to deliver news they wish they didn't have to deliver. He led me to a small conference room with fluorescent lights that hummed too loud and a table that was scarred with coffee rings and the ghosts of 1,000 difficult conversations. "Ms. Miller," he started, sitting across from me with a manila folder that looked too thin to contain anything important. "I want to say first that I'm very sorry for your loss. Losing your home is traumatic, and I understand this is a difficult time, but there's something about your policy that you need to see. Something that doesn't," he paused, choosing words carefully, "something that doesn't match what you told me on the phone." He slid the folder across the table, and I opened it with hands that wanted to shake but refused to. My insurance policy. The one I'd signed when I moved into the apartment 7 years ago. Standard renter's coverage. My name listed as the insured party, Rachel and Miller. Coverage for personal property up to $150,000. Liability coverage. All the normal things you agree to without reading too carefully because insurance is boring and you never think you'll actually need it. And then I turned to the last page and the room tilted sideways. Beneficiary designation, it said at the top, and underneath in clear black type, Gerald Miller and Patricia Miller, 100% of death benefit and personal property claim proceeds. I read it 3 times, trying to make the words say something different, trying to make them make sense. "This is a mistake," I heard myself say, my voice coming from somewhere far away. "I never signed this. I would never list them as beneficiaries. Why would I?" I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the relationship I had with my parents, the distance, the coldness, the years of feeling like an obligation, rather than a daughter. "That's your signature," Greg said quietly, pointing to the bottom of the page, and I looked, really looked, and it did look like my signature. The same loops and curves, the same way I crossed my T's and dotted my I's, the same slant to the letters, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never held a pen to this paper, had never seen this document, had never made the decision to give my parents access to money that should have been mine. This form was submitted 6 months ago. Greg continued, his voice careful, measured. "The original policy had you listed as your own beneficiary, which is standard. You get the payout for your lost property. You use it to rebuild, but someone changed it. Someone submitted this form 6 months ago designating your parents as the sole beneficiaries." 6 months ago. The words echoed in my head. 6 months before my apartment burned down. 6 months before my mother made her first visit in 2 years. 6 months of planning, of preparation, of setting up dominoes that would fall exactly when they wanted them to fall. "The payout amount," Greg said, and I could hear the apology in his voice even before he said the number. "For a total loss like yours, with the coverage you had, we're looking at approximately $150,000. $150,000, enough to pay off debts, enough to solve financial problems, enough to be worth." I stopped that thought before it could complete, couldn't let myself finish the sentence that ended with "enough to be worth killing your daughter for," because that's what this was, wasn't it? Not murder exactly because I'd survived, but attempted murder, arson, fraud, all wrapped up in a document with a forged signature and a plan that almost worked. "Ms. Miller," Greg leaned forward, "there's something else you should know. A fire investigator from the city called us yesterday. He's been asking questions about this policy, about the beneficiary designation, about the timeline." My heart stopped, then started again too fast, racing like I was running again, like I was back in that stairwell choking on smoke. Why would a fire investigator care about my insurance beneficiaries? I asked, but I already knew, could feel the answer sitting in my chest like a stone. Greg held my gaze. "I think you know why, Ms. Miller. I think you've already started to put this together, but I need to tell you officially that this claim is being held pending investigation. We can't pay out on a policy when there are questions about," he paused again, "about the nature of the fire and the authenticity of the beneficiary designation. Fraud is a serious crime. And if someone forged your signature to make themselves beneficiaries and then deliberately caused the loss, that's not just insurance fraud. That's attempted murder." The words hung in the air between us. Attempted murder. My parents hadn't just been cold when I called them, hadn't just been unsupportive. They'd been covering their tracks, maintaining distance, making sure there was no evidence that they cared, that they'd help, that they had any reason to be involved. Because if I'd died in that fire, if I hadn't woken up at 3:17, if the smoke had gotten me before I reached the stairs, they would have gotten $150,000, and I would have been a tragic accident. A cautionary tale about faulty wiring, and no one would have questioned why they seemed so unmoved by their daughter's death, because everyone knows some families just aren't close. I left the insurance office with a folder containing my fraudulent beneficiary designation and a name, Marcus Webb, Fire Investigator, City Fire Department. Greg had written it on a yellow sticky note, suggested I call him, said that Webb was asking questions that deserved answers, and as I sat in my borrowed car, a Honda Civic that Marcus had insisted I use until I got back on my feet, I pulled out my phone and stared at that name, at the 10 digits that separated me from confirmation, from Official acknowledgement that what I suspected, what I feared, what I knew deep in my bones, was actually true. My mother had tried to kill me for money, and my stepfather had helped, and they'd almost gotten away with it. I called the number, my hand steadier than I expected, steadier than it should have been, and a voice answered on the second ring, gruff, professional, no nonsense, Webb, Fire Investigation Unit, and I said, "My name is Rachel Miller. I understand you've been asking questions about my apartment fire." And there was a pause, a shift in his tone. "Ms. Miller," he said, and I could hear him sitting up straighter. "Relocating to somewhere more private. Yes, I've been very interested in your case. Are you available to meet today? I have some things I'd like to show you." We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the insurance office, neutral ground, public but quiet. Webb was exactly what I expected a fire investigator to look like. Late 40s, weathered face, sharp eyes that had seen too many fires and learned to read them like other people read books. He ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. "I don't believe your fire was an accident," he said, pulling out his phone and opening a photo album that I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. My bedroom, charred black. The walls scorched, the ceiling partially collapsed, everything I owned reduced to carbon and ash. "You see this?" He pointed to a spot on the screen. "This is the point of origin. Right here behind where your dresser used to be. Near the electrical outlet, like the report said. But here's what doesn't make sense. There's no evidence of electrical failure." "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I already understood where this was going. "It means the outlet wasn't faulty. The wiring wasn't old or damaged. There was no surge, no short circuit, no mechanical failure that would cause a fire to start there naturally." Webb swiped to another photo. "We found something else. Residue near the point of origin, chemical accelerant, not gasoline or anything obvious. Something more sophisticated, something that burns hot and fast and doesn't leave much trace, except we have really good forensics now, really good labs, and we found it." "Someone set this fire," I said, not a question, a statement, a confirmation of what my gut had been screaming since I sat on that curb at dawn. "Someone helped this fire start," Webb corrected, deliberately, with planning, with the kind of knowledge that suggests they'd researched how to do it, how to make it look accidental, how to make sure it burned hot enough and fast enough that evidence would be destroyed. His eyes met mine. "I've been doing this for 22 years, Ms. Miller. I know what accidental looks like. I know what electrical fires look like. I know what cooking fires and candle fires and space heater fires look like. This isn't any of those things. This is arson, and the question is who had motive and opportunity." I told him about the insurance policy, about the forged signature, about the $150,000 that my parents would have collected if I died, about my mother's visit 5 days before the fire, her first visit in 2 years, 3 hours of walking through my apartment, touching things, asking questions, carrying a bag that came in full and left empty. I told him about the phone call at dawn, the coldness, the not our problem, the complete lack of concern for whether I was hurt or alive or homeless. I told him everything, because what was the point of holding back? What was the point of protecting people who'd tried to kill me? Webb took notes, his expression never changing, professional mask in place, but I could see something in his eyes, anger maybe, or recognition. "When did you say your mother visited?" he asked. 5 days before the fire, February 7th. She showed up around 2 in the afternoon. I was surprised because we hadn't talked much in months, years really, but she said she missed me, said she wanted to see my place. I swallowed hard. I thought it was nice. I thought maybe we were reconnecting. He pulled out his phone again, tapped through screens. "I checked your building's entry logs, electronic locks. They keep records of everyone who uses a key card or gets buzzed in. According to the system, only 2 people accessed your unit in the week before the fire. You and a woman who was buzzed in by you on February 7th at 2:07 p.m. She didn't leave until 5:12 p.m. That's 3 hours and 5 minutes, Ms. Miller. 3 hours is a long time to spend in someone's apartment, especially someone you haven't seen in 2 years. Long enough to place a device," I said quietly, "long enough to set up whatever caused that fire." Webb nodded. "We found fragments near the origin point, plastic and wire, consistent with a timer device, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. Plug it into an outlet, plug something else into it, set it to turn on at a specific time. If you plugged in something that would overheat, that would spark. That would start a fire when it activated. You could be miles away when it happened. You could have an alibi. You could look completely innocent." He leaned back in his chair. "I've been trying to trace where something like that might have been purchased. It's harder than you'd think. These timers are common, sold everywhere, but I've been checking hardware stores near your parents' address, seeing if anyone remembers selling one to someone matching their description. Do you think you'll find it? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, hollow. Do you think you can prove they did this? He looked at me for a long moment. Proof takes time, Ms. Miller. It takes building a case piece by piece, surveillance footage, purchase records, forensic analysis, witness statements. But what I can tell you right now is this. I know your fire wasn't an accident. I know someone deliberately set it. I know you have parents who were listed as beneficiaries on a policy. You didn't sign. I know your mother visited days before and stayed for hours, and I know that when you called them after barely escaping with your life, they told you it wasn't their problem. His voice hardened. That's not how innocent people act. That's not how parents act when their child almost dies. That's how guilty people act when they're trying to maintain distance from a crime they committed. I sat in that coffee shop with my cold cup of coffee and the photos of my burned bedroom on Webb's phone, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, the trauma, the loss, but underneath it something harder was forming, something cold and clear and absolutely certain. My parents had tried to kill me for insurance money. They'd planned it, executed it, and when it failed they'd try to act like I was the problem, like I was an inconvenience, like my survival was my own fault for being in the way of their payday. And now, sitting across from a fire investigator who believed me, who was building a case, who was turning suspicion into evidence, I realized that I had a choice. I could let them get away with it, could pretend it was all coincidence, could maintain the fiction of family and move on with my life. Or I could fight back, could help build the case, could make sure they faced consequences for what they'd tried to do. There's more, Webb said, pulling out a printed document. I requested your mother's cell phone records. It took some doing, needed probable cause for a warrant, but I got them, and there are some interesting patterns. 13 calls to a number registered to someone named Vincent Corso in the month before your fire. Corso has a record, insurance fraud, arson for hire. He's been suspected in at least 4 other cases, but we've never had enough evidence to charge him. The calls stopped completely. After your fire, like your mother, had no more reason to contact him. She hired someone, I said, the words tasting like ash. She didn't just set the fire herself. She hired a professional. That's what the pattern suggests, Webb said. But Corso is careful. If he was involved, he won't have left direct evidence. What we have is circumstantial, the calls, the timing, his background, but it's not enough for an arrest. Not yet. What we need is for someone to make a mistake, to get nervous, to reach out to each other again, or he looked at me carefully. We need someone on the inside, someone who could maybe prompt a response, get them to say something incriminating. You want me to talk to them, I said, understanding where this was going. You want me to see if they'll confess, if they'll say something that proves what they did, and he nodded. I know it's asking a lot. I know these are your parents, but Ms. Miller, they tried to kill you, they forged documents, they committed fraud, and if we don't stop them, they'll do this to someone else. People who commit insurance fraud don't stop at one attempt. They keep going, keep finding victims, keep burning things down for money, and next time someone might not wake up in time, someone might not make it out. I thought about that, about another family, another daughter, another fire at 3:17 in the morning, and I thought about my mother's face when she'd visited, the way she'd touched everything, the way she'd asked about insurance, the way she'd smiled when she left, and I thought about my stepfather's voice on the phone. Not our problem, be more careful, and I made my decision. Tell me what you need me to do, I said. Tell me how to help you prove what they did, because they tried to kill me, and they acted like I was an inconvenience when I survived, and I'm done protecting people who see me as disposable. I'm done being the daughter who makes things easy for parents who want me dead. So yes, I'll help you build your case. I'll talk to them. I'll get you what you need, because they need to face consequences. They need to understand that you can't try to murder someone and then complain that they're still alive and causing problems. And I want to be the one who makes sure they learn that lesson. Webb smiled, grim and satisfied. Then let's talk about how we wire you for sound, because what happens next is we give your mother enough rope to hang herself. We set up a situation where she thinks she's safe, where she thinks you don't know anything, and we see if she's stupid enough to gloat, to confirm, to say something that proves what we already know, and when she does, when she can't help herself, we'll have everything we need to put her exactly where she belongs, in a cell thinking about how she tried to kill her daughter for $150,000 and ended up with nothing except a prison sentence, and the knowledge that the daughter she tried to eliminate was the one who brought her down. The recording device was smaller than I expected, about the size of a thick button. Webb attached it to the inside seam of my borrowed sweater, where it would be invisible, but would pick up every word spoken within 15 feet. He tested it twice, had me walk around the room talking, played back my voice crystal clear with no static, no distortion, just me saying testing 1, 2, 3 like I was preparing for a performance, which I guess I was, the performance of a lifetime, pretending I didn't. No, my mother had tried to kill me, pretending I was still the naive daughter who would accept any explanation, any excuse, any lie she offered. We'll have backup nearby, Webb said as he showed me how to activate the device with a specific motion, a scratch on my collar that would look natural but would send a signal. If at any point you feel unsafe, if anything goes wrong, you give the signal and we come in. Do you understand? I understood. Understood that I was about to walk into my mother's house wearing a wire. Understood that I was going to try to get her to confess to attempted murder. Understood that this was dangerous in ways I couldn't fully predict. But I also understood that without this, without proof, she would walk free, would keep the money if she ever figured out how to get it despite the investigation, would never face consequences for trying to burn me alive, and that understanding made me braver than I had any right to be. I called my mother from the parking lot of a grocery store, hands steadier than they should have been, voice calm, carefully modulated to sound defeated, broken, exactly the way she would expect me to sound after losing everything. She picked up on the third ring. Rachel, her voice was surprised. Careful. We haven't heard from you since. She paused delicately. Since the incident. Are you all right? The incident, like it was a fender bender, like it was a spilled drink, not a fire that destroyed 7 years of my life. I'm managing, I said, letting my voice shake just a little, staying with a friend, trying to figure things out. The insurance company is being difficult about the claim, asking a lot of questions. I thought maybe we could talk. Maybe you could help me understand some things? Silence, too long. I could hear her thinking, calculating. What kind of things? She asked, I paused, made it sound like I was struggling to articulate. They asked about beneficiaries, about paperwork I don't remember signing. It's probably nothing, but it's confusing, and you've always been better with paperwork than me. I thought maybe you could look at it, help me make sense of it? Another pause, then her voice came back warmer, more familiar. The mother voice she used when she wanted something. Of course, honey. Why don't you come by the house? Maybe tomorrow afternoon. Gerald will be at work, so it'll just be us girls. We can sit down and look at whatever paperwork you need help with. I'd love to see you. Make sure you're really okay. Tomorrow afternoon, I repeated. That would be great. Thank you, Mom. And I hung up before she could hear how my voice wanted to crack. Not from grief this time, but from rage, from the casual way she'd lied, from the performance of concern, from the way she'd made sure Gerald would be gone, would have an alibi, would be somewhere public and visible, while she dealt with the daughter who'd inconveniently survived. Webb was waiting in an unmarked car 3 spaces over. He'd heard everything through the wire. Tomorrow at 2, he confirmed. We'll have surveillance set up by noon. I'll be parked on the street. You'll have backup within 30 seconds if you need it. Remember, your job is just to get her talking, ask about the visit, ask about the insurance, see if she'll explain what happened. People who think they're clever love to explain how they outsmarted everyone. Give her the opportunity and see if she takes it. That night, I barely slept, kept running through scenarios in my head, kept imagining how the conversation would go, what she'd say, whether she'd confess or deflect or somehow turn it around to make me the problem. Kept touching the recording device in my sweater like a talisman, like proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I suspected was real and supported by professionals who investigated crimes for a living. Marcus found me at 2 a.m. sitting in his kitchen drinking tea. I wasn't tasting you. Don't have to do this, he said quietly. You could just let the investigators handle it. Let them build the case without putting yourself in danger. And I looked at him and said, I need to hear her say it. I need to know for certain that my mother, the woman who raised me, actually tried to kill me, because right now it's evidence and patterns and circumstantial connections. But if I hear her admit it, if I hear her explain how she did it, then I stopped, couldn't finish, and he just nodded, squeezed my shoulder, said be careful tomorrow, please, because you've been through enough and I don't want to lose a friend. The next afternoon I pulled up to my childhood home at exactly 2 p.m. The house looked exactly as I remembered. White siding, blue shutters, flower boxes that my mother maintained with obsessive precision, the lawn manicured, the hedges trimmed, the mailbox painted fresh, everything neat and perfect and completely normal, the kind of house where nothing bad ever happened, where families were functional and mothers loved their daughters and fires were accidents that happened to other people. I sat in the car for a full minute, breathing, centering myself, Checking that the recording device was active, the small LED light hidden inside the collar showed green, recording, capturing, turning everything that happened next into evidence. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She must have been watching for me. She was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a cardigan, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup, the version of herself she presented as authentic, as real, as the woman who didn't care about appearances even though every detail was carefully calculated. Rachel. She pulled me into a hug, held on too long, too tight, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I've been so worried about you. Come in, I made
Coffee.
The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, some plug-in air freshener that was supposed to make everything feel warm and welcoming. I followed her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast before school for 18 years, the same table, the same chairs, the same window looking out onto the backyard. Nothing had changed, which somehow made everything worse, made the disconnect more obvious. This normal kitchen, this normal house, this normal mother who'd tried to kill me. For insurance money. So tell me what's going on, she said, pouring coffee into mugs I recognized, the ones with the blue flowers that she only used for guests. What's the insurance company asking about? I pulled out the beneficiary designation form, the one Greg had given me, laid it on the table between us. They're asking about this, I said, keeping my voice confused, uncertain. They say, I changed my beneficiaries 6 months ago to list you and Gerald, but I don't remember doing that. Do you know anything about it? She picked up the paper, studied it, her face a perfect mask of puzzlement. That is strange, she said, but that's definitely your signature. See the way you cross your T's? Maybe you did it and forgot. You've been under so much stress with work. Sometimes we do things on autopilot and don't remember. Maybe, I said, but why would I list you as beneficiaries? I mean, we haven't been that close lately, no offense. It just seems like an odd thing for me to do. Her hand tightened on the coffee mug, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. Well, she said carefully, you know we'll always be here for you. Maybe subconsciously you knew that if anything happened to you we'd handle things properly, make sure your affairs were in order. It's actually quite mature of you to think ahead like that. Quite mature. Like I'd planned for my own death. Like I'd prepared for the fire that she'd set. I nodded slowly. I guess that makes sense. It's just the timing that's weird. 6 months ago, right before, I paused, right before the fire. Just seems like a strange coincidence. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. Coincidences happen, Rachel. That's why they're called coincidences. You can't read meaning into every random occurrence. That's how people drive themselves crazy, seeing patterns where there aren't any. I thought about the device recording every word, thought about Webb listening from his car down the street, thought about the evidence piling up, and I decided to push harder. When you visited my apartment, I said, 5 days before the fire, you stayed for a really long time, like 3 hours. I appreciated it, really appreciated you wanting to spend time with me after so long. But I've been thinking about it, and I can't remember what we did for 3 hours. What were we doing? She took a sip of coffee, buying time, just catching up. Honey, just talking about your life, your job. We looked at photo albums. I wanted to see how you decorated the place. Time flies when you're enjoying yourself. Don't you remember? I don't actually, I said, and I kept my voice gentle, confused, like I was trying to remember rather than trying to trap her. I remember you bringing a big black bag. You said it had gifts in it, but I never saw what was in it. What did you bring me? Nothing significant, just some old things I thought you might want, family photos, some of your grandmother's costume jewelry, little things. You seemed happy to have them. She was lying. I'd never received any of those things, never seen the contents of that bag, and she knew I knew she was lying, but she was betting I wouldn't call her on it, wouldn't push, would accept the explanation because that's what I'd always done, accepted her version of reality. But I don't have any of that stuff now. I said, it all burned in the fire. I lost the photos, the jewelry, everything. It seems like such bad luck that you'd give me those things and then they'd be destroyed less than a week later. Hey, I need to pause here for just a second because if your blood is boiling right now, if you're watching this thinking, how could any mother do this to her own child, drop the word justice below because what happens next, let me tell you, my mother really should have remembered that recording devices exist before she started explaining exactly how she outsmarted everyone. And from our stats, we've got way more viewers than subscribers. If you're following this story, if you want to see how this And kindly join our community and hit that subscribe button because you really don't want to miss the moment she realizes I've been recording everything. Now back to what happened. Her face changed, the mask slipping just slightly. Bad luck, she repeated. Yes, I suppose it was, but Rachel, these things happen, fires happen, accidents happen. You can't spend your life dwelling on what might have been. You have to move forward, accept what happened, and rebuild. She was telling me to accept it, to let it go, to move on, and I wondered how many times she'd practiced this speech. How many times she'd rehearsed being the supportive mother helping her daughter process tragedy, never knowing that her daughter had already figured out she'd caused the tragedy. I'm trying to move forward, I said, but the fire investigator keeps asking me questions. He seems to think it wasn't an accident. He mentioned something about chemical accelerants and timer devices. Do you know what that means? The change was instant. Her eyes went sharp, her body tense. What investigator? What exactly did he say to you? Just that they found some kind of residue, that the fire didn't start the way fires usually start, from electrical problems. He asked if anyone had access to my apartment in the days before. I told him you visited, but I explained that you're my mother, that there's no way you'd. I let my voice trail off, let the implication hang. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Rachel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. These investigators, they like to create narratives where there aren't any. They see suspicious circumstances because their job depends on finding crimes, but sometimes a fire is just a fire. Sometimes faulty wiring is just faulty wiring, and you need to be very careful about what you tell them, what you speculate about, because they can twist your words, make innocent actions seem suspicious. He asked about the insurance beneficiary thing too, I said, pushing harder now, watching her face. Asked why I would have changed it 6 months before the fire. Asked if I even remembered signing it. Mom, did I sign that form? Did I change those beneficiaries, or did someone do it for me? The silence stretched between us, long enough that I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, long enough that I could see her making calculations, deciding how much to admit, how much to deny, how to spin the situation back under her control. Finally, she leaned forward, took my hands in hers, her grip tight, almost painful. Rachel, sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions to protect their children. Sometimes we have to do things that might not seem logical in the moment, but are for the best in the long run. She wasn't denying it, wasn't saying she didn't forge my signature, wasn't saying she didn't set the fire. She was preparing to justify it, to explain why attempted murder was actually an act of love. I need you to explain, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need you to tell me what you did and why, because I can't move forward until I understand what happened. The clock ticked. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she started talking, started explaining, started confessing, and the recording device captured every word. Your stepfather got us into some trouble, she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something unfortunate but unavoidable, like a car breakdown, like a missed appointment, not like attempted murder, gambling debts, serious ones, to people who don't negotiate, who don't extend payment plans, who break things when they don't get their money. We owed almost $200,000, Rachel. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what happens to people who owe that kind of money, to those kinds of people? I stayed very still, kept my face neutral. My hands relaxed, even though every muscle in my body wanted to tense, wanted to run, wanted to scream at this woman who was about to tell me that murdering me was justified because of her husband's gambling problem. So you needed money, I said quietly, prompting her to continue, to give me more, to dig the hole deeper with every word. We needed money desperately, she confirmed, and we'd already borrowed against the house, already maxed out credit cards, already exhausted every legitimate option. And then I remembered your insurance policy, remembered that you'd mentioned once having renter's insurance, good coverage because the landlord required it, and I thought. She paused, took a sip of coffee like this was just normal conversation. I thought, what if something happened to that apartment? What if there was a loss? You'd get the insurance payout and you could help us. You could save your family. But I wouldn't have given you $150,000, I said, keeping my voice soft, confused, not accusatory, not yet. Even if I'd gotten the insurance money, I would have used it to replace my things, to find a new apartment. I wouldn't have just handed it over to pay Gerald's gambling debts. She nodded like I'd made a good point, like this was a reasonable objection to her plan. Exactly. That's why I had to adjust the beneficiaries, had to make sure that if something happened, the money would come directly to us. I knew you wouldn't understand, knew you'd see it as your money, when really it was the family's money. We're family, Rachel. What's yours is ours. That's how family works, so you forged my signature. I said 6 months ago you forged my signature to make yourself and Gerald the beneficiaries on my insurance policy. And then I stopped, made her fill in the blank, made her say it out loud. And then I made sure there would be a claim to file. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, like she was describing paying a bill. Visiting your apartment wasn't about reconnecting, honey. Although part of me did miss you. I'm not a monster. I brought the timer device in that black bag. It was easy to set up. Plug it into the outlet behind your dresser where you'd never see it. Plug a small space heater into the timer. Set it to turn on at 3 in the morning when you'd be asleep, when the building would be quiet, when no one would notice until it was too late. The heater would overheat, would spark, would start a fire that would look like faulty wiring, like an accident, and you'd never even know it wasn't. My hands were shaking now. I couldn't stop them. Couldn't control the visceral physical reaction to hearing my mother describe in detail how she'd planned to kill me. And what if I didn't wake up? I asked, my voice cracking. What if the smoke got me before I made it out? What if I died in that fire you set? Would the $150,000 have been worth it? She looked genuinely puzzled by the question, like it hadn't occurred to her to consider my death as a real possibility. Well, you're young, healthy. You've always been a light sleeper. I thought you'd smell the smoke and get out. This was never about hurting you, Rachel. This was about solving a financial crisis, about saving our family from people who would have done much worse to us than a fire. You have to understand the position we were in. But you called Vincent Corso, I said, throwing out the name Webb had given me, watching her face. You called a man who's been suspected of arson for hire 13 times in the month before my fire. That doesn't sound like you expected me to just smell smoke and walk out safely. That sounds like you wanted to make sure the fire was big enough, hot enough, devastating enough that I wouldn't have time to escape. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. How do you know about Vincent? Who told you that name? The fire investigator, I said calmly, even though my heart was racing. Even though I wanted to scream. He traced your phone records. He knows you called Corso. He knows Corso specializes in fires that look like accidents. He knows everything, Mom, and he's building a case, and I came here today to give you a chance to tell me your side, to explain why you did this. But what you're telling me is that you tried to kill me for insurance money to pay off Gerald's gambling debts, and you don't even think you did anything wrong. She stood up fast, her chair scraping against the floor. That investigator is lying, trying to create a case where there isn't one. I would never. You're my daughter. I love you. How could you even think? But you just told me. I interrupted. You just explained exactly how you did it. The timer, the heater, the forged signature. You just confessed to everything. Her face changed again, calculation replacing panic. No, I was speaking hypothetically, trying to help you understand how these investigators twist things. I never said I actually did any of that. You're confused, you're traumatized, you're not remembering this conversation correctly. She was trying to gaslight me, trying to make me doubt what I'd just heard her say. And it might have worked if I didn't have a recording device capturing every word, if Webb wasn't listening from his car, if I wasn't absolutely certain that what had just happened was real and documented and undeniable. I'm not confused, Mom, I said, standing up, backing toward the door. You told me you forged the insurance paperwork. You told me you planted a timer device. You told me you wanted the insurance money to pay Gerald's debts. You just confessed to attempted murder and insurance fraud. And I need to leave now, no. She moved fast, blocking the doorway, her voice sharp. You're not leaving. Not until we figure this out. Not until you understand that you can't talk to that investigator anymore. You can't tell him what we discussed. This was a private conversation between mother and daughter. This is protected. You can't use this against me. She was wrong about that. Conversations weren't protected just because they were between family members, and she was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. But first I needed to get past her, needed to get out of this house, needed to give Webb the signal that things had gone bad. I reached up to scratch my collar, the motion we'd practiced, the signal for backup. But she saw, understood somehow what I was doing, and her hand shot out and grabbed my sweater, felt the device, found it, ripped it away with a strength I didn't know she had. What is this? She held up the recording device, her voice rising to a scream. Were you recording me? Did you come into my house wearing a wire? How could you? You betrayed me. You trapped me. What kind of daughter does that to her own mother? The kind whose mother tried to kill her, I said, backing away, heading for the back door since she was blocking the front. The kind who wants proof that her mother is a murderer. The kind who's done protecting people who see her as disposable. She threw the recording device on the floor, stomped on it, crushing it under her heel. "There's no proof now," she said, breathing hard. "It's just your word against mine, and no one will believe you. They'll think you're a bitter daughter trying to blame her mother for her own carelessness. They'll think you're making stories because you can't accept that you caused your own problems." I almost felt sorry for her, almost pitied how little she understood about how recordings worked, how backups functioned, how investigators prepared for exactly this kind of situation. "That device was transmitting in real time," I said quietly. "Everything you said went to a receiver in an investigator's car parked on your street. Crushing it doesn't delete the recording. It just proves you knew you said something incriminating. Congratulations, Mom. You just added destruction of evidence to your charges." The doorbell rang, sharp and official. She turned toward it instinctively, and I ran. Out the back door, across the yard, through the gate, around to the front where Webb was standing with 2 uniformed officers, where my mother was being read her rights, where her hands were being cuffed behind her back, while she screamed that I'd set her up, that I'd trapped her, that this was entrapment, that none of it was legal. "Patricia Miller," Webb said clearly, his voice carrying over her protests, "you are under arrest for arson in the 1st degree, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights?" She didn't answer, just stared at me across the lawn, and the look in her eyes wasn't remorse, wasn't guilt, wasn't maternal love finally surfacing. It was pure rage, pure hatred, the look of someone who'd gambled everything on a plan and lost, who'd tried to eliminate an obstacle and failed, who was now facing consequences she'd never imagined would actually reach her. "This is your fault," she screamed as they led her to the patrol car. "You're supposed to die in that fire. You were supposed to stay asleep. You ruined everything by waking up. You've always been a problem. Always been difficult. I wish I'd used more accelerant. I wish I'd made sure you couldn't escape." The officer stopped, looked at Webb, who was recording on his phone, capturing this second confession, this public acknowledgement of exactly what she tried to do. My mother realized too late what she'd said, tried to backtrack, tried to claim she was speaking emotionally, not literally, but it was too late. The words were said, were recorded, were heard by witnesses, and there was no taking them back, no spinning them into something innocent, no explaining them away as misunderstanding. They put her in the back of the patrol car and drove away, and I stood on the lawn of my childhood home watching my mother disappear behind tinted windows, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not grief. Just a hollow emptiness where my family used to be, where my illusions used to live, where I used to believe that mothers loved their daughters more than money. Gerald came home 20 minutes later, pulled into the driveway whistling, clearly having no idea what had happened. Webb approached him before he could get to the front door. "Mr. Miller, we need to ask you some questions about your wife's activities 6 months ago, about phone calls to Vincent Corso, about gambling debts and insurance fraud." And I watched my stepfather's face go through the same progression my mother's had: confusion, fear, calculation, denial. Watched him try to claim ignorance, try to say he didn't know what Patricia had planned, try to throw her under the bus to save himself. But Webb had his phone records too, had evidence of him accessing my apartment building using a key Patricia had copied, had surveillance footage of him meeting with Corso, had bank records showing cash withdrawals that matched payments Corso was known to accept. Gerald hadn't just known about the plan, he'd helped execute it, and now he was facing the same charges, the same consequences, the same prison time. I left them there, left Webb to process the arrests, left the house I'd grown up in knowing I'd never go back, never stand in that kitchen again, never sit in my childhood bedroom, never pretend that this place held anything except bad memories and evidence of how little I'd mattered to the people who raised me. Marcus picked me up at the corner. I'd texted him the address, and when I got in his car, he didn't ask questions, didn't push. Just drove me back to his apartment where I sat on his couch and stared at nothing for 3 hours while he made dinner and pretended everything was normal. Finally, as the sun was setting, I spoke. She told me I should have died. I said, my voice strange to my own ears. She said I ruined everything by waking up, by escaping, by surviving. She wished she'd used more accelerant. Wished she'd made sure I couldn't get out, and the worst part is, I heard him move closer. Felt him sit beside me. What's the worst part? The worst part is that I think she really believes she's the victim here, I said. I think she genuinely thinks I betrayed her by refusing to die conveniently, by making her plan fail, by fighting back. She doesn't understand that attempting to murder your daughter for insurance money is wrong. She understands that getting caught is wrong, but the actual crime, the actual betrayal, she doesn't see it, doesn't feel it, can't comprehend why she's being punished for doing what she thought was necessary. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Some people aren't capable of real empathy. They go through life treating other people as objects, as tools, as obstacles, as resources to be exploited, and they never develop the ability to see others as fully human, as deserving of consideration and care. Your mother is one of those people, and no amount of evidence or consequences will change that. You can't make someone feel empathy if they're not wired for it." I knew he was right, knew that. My mother would go to prison believing she was wronged, believing I was the villain, believing that if I just died like I was supposed to, everything would have been fine, and I had to make peace with that, had to accept that I would never get the remorse I wanted, never get the apology I deserved, never get the mother I needed. "But you survived," Marcus said quietly. "You figured out what happened, you helped build the case, you got justice, and you're still here, still breathing, still fighting, and that matters, Rachel. That matters more than anything else." The trial took 8 months to start, 8 months of depositions and motions and legal maneuvering, but when it finally happened, it was quick, brutal, efficient. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording of my mother's confession, the second confession she'd screamed on the lawn, Gerald's phone records and bank withdrawals, Corso's testimony after he'd taken a plea deal to testify against his clients, the forensic evidence from the fire, the forged insurance documents, all of it presented methodically, undeniably, and when the jury came back after only 4 hours of deliberation, I knew what they decided before the foreman even spoke. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, arson in the first degree, insurance fraud, conspiracy. My mother stood when the verdict was read, and her face showed no emotion, no recognition that she'd done anything wrong, just calculation, already planning appeals, already figuring angles, still believing she could manipulate her way out of consequences. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 12. Gerald got 18 years for his role, for helping plan it, for facilitating contact with Corso, for accessing my building, for being complicit in every stage of a plan to kill me for money. And as they were led out of the courtroom in shackles, my mother looked at me one last time and mouthed the words, "This is your fault." And I looked back and mouthed, "You tried to kill me," and then she was gone and I was free. The insurance companies settled 3 weeks after the verdict. $150,000 paid directly to me, the rightful owner, the intended recipient, the person who was supposed to benefit from a policy designed to help rebuild after disaster, not fund someone else's criminal enterprise. Greg from the insurance office personally delivered the check, apologized for the delays, for the investigation, for every moment I'd had to wait while they verified that I was the victim and not the perpetrator. "You handled this with remarkable strength," he said as I signed the final paperwork. "Most people would have fallen apart, would have accepted the confusion, would have let their parents get away with it." And I'd looked at him and said, "Most people's parents don't try to murder them. Most people have families who love them. I just had a crime scene disguised as a childhood." And he nodded sadly, like he understood, like he'd seen too many families destroy each other over money to be surprised anymore. I used some of the settlement to replace what I'd lost, bought a new laptop, new clothes, new furniture for the small apartment I'd rented after staying with Marcus for 4 months. I couldn't bring myself to replace the guitar my father had given me, because there was no replacing that. No finding another instrument with his handwriting on it, with his love embedded in the wood. So instead I bought a different guitar, a better one. And I learned to play new songs, songs that didn't carry the weight of memories that had burned. I replaced the photo albums by reaching out to old friends, to my father's family who I'd lost touch with after he died, to college roommates and colleagues, asking if they had any pictures of me, any evidence that I'd existed before the fire, and slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt a visual history, not the same as what I'd lost, but proof that I was real, that I'd lived, that I mattered to people who weren't trying to kill me. The rest of the money I saved, invested, turned it to a foundation for a future I was building on my own terms, Without family help, without obligation, without the burden of owing anything to people who saw me as a resource rather than a person, I got promoted at work. My boss had been following the trial, had seen the news coverage, had pulled me aside after the verdict and said, "You showed up every day, did excellent work. Never let your personal crisis affect your professional performance." That's the kind of employee we want to invest in, and I gotten a raise, a better title, a corner office with windows that let in real sunlight, proof that surviving hadn't just been about legal victory, it had been about rebuilding everything they tried to destroy. 6 months after the sentencing, I got a letter from the prison. My mother's handwriting on the envelope, smaller and shakier than I remembered, like incarceration had made her physically diminish. I almost threw it away unopened, but something made me stop, made me curious what she could possibly have to say now that she'd been convicted, now that there was no more manipulation to attempt, no more lies to spin. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. "Dear Rachel." It began, no term of endearment. No honey or sweetheart, just my name, cold and formal. "I've had a lot of time to think in here, a lot of time to reflect on what happened, and I want you to know that I understand now what I did was wrong. I should never have put you in danger, should never have prioritized money over your safety. I was desperate, and I made terrible choices, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry, and I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I'm still your mother. You're still my daughter, and that bond can't be broken by mistakes, or even by crimes. Please come visit me. Please let me see you. Let me try to rebuild what we lost." I read it 3 times looking for sincerity, looking for genuine remorse, looking for any indication that she actually understood what she'd done, but all I found was manipulation, the same pattern I'd seen my whole life, the apology designed to get what she wanted rather than acknowledge what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught, sorry she was in prison, sorry her plan failed, but she wasn't sorry for trying to kill me, wasn't sorry for the trauma, wasn't sorry for showing me exactly how little I mattered to her. The letter was just another attempt at control, another way to make me feel guilty for her consequences, another performance of motherhood designed to get me to do what she wanted. I got a piece of paper and wrote back, not to send but for myself, for closure. "Patricia, you are not my mother anymore. Mothers don't set fires to kill their children. Mothers don't forge signatures to steal insurance money. Mothers don't scream that their daughters should have died when their murder plans fail. You lost the right to call yourself my mother the moment you chose money over my life. I will not visit you. I will not forgive you. I will not participate in your fantasy that what you did was forgivable. You will serve your 12 years minimum, and when you get out, I will still have a restraining order in place. I will still refuse contact. I will still choose myself over any relationship with you. This is not cruelty. This is self-preservation. This is me finally understanding that I deserve better than people who see me as disposable." I folded the letter carefully, put it in a drawer with the other documents from the case, the insurance paperwork, the court transcripts, the evidence that this had really happened, that I hadn't imagined it, that my family had really tried to kill me and I'd really survived and really gotten justice. And then I blocked the prison's address through my mail service, made it so no more letters could reach me, cut off the final avenue of contact, made myself unreachable to people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with access to my life. My father's family reached out after the trial. Cousins and aunts and uncles I hadn't seen since his funeral when I was 17, they'd read about the case, had seen my mother's conviction, had understood finally why I'd disappeared from family gatherings after my father died, why I'd stopped returning calls, why I'd let relationships fade. They'd assumed I was busy, was growing up, was living my own life. But now they understood I'd been surviving, had been trapped in a house with a woman who would eventually try to murder me, and they felt guilty for not noticing, for not checking, for not making sure I was okay. "We should have stayed in touch," my Aunt Linda said when we met for coffee. "Your father would have wanted us to look out for you, to make sure Patricia was treating you right, and I'm so sorry we didn't. I'm so sorry you went through that alone." And I told her it wasn't her fault, that abusers are good at hiding what they do, that my mother had been performing normal for years, that no one could have known, but inside I'd wondered what would have happened if someone had checked, if someone had asked the right questions, if someone had noticed that I never seemed happy when I talked about my family. Would it have changed anything, or would my mother have just gotten better at hiding, better at performing, better at waiting until I was far enough away that no one would connect her to the fire? I started therapy 2 months after the trial ended. Dr. Sarachan specialized in family trauma, in parental abuse, in the specific kind of psychological damage that comes from being betrayed by the people who are supposed to protect you. Our first session, she'd asked me, "What do you want to get out of therapy?" And I'd said, "I want to stop feeling like I deserve this. I want to stop wondering what I did wrong to make my mother hate me enough to try to kill me. I want to understand that her actions were about her, not about my worth." And she'd nodded and said, "That's exactly what we're going to work on. Because you didn't deserve this, you didn't cause this, you didn't fail as a daughter. Your mother failed as a human being, and your healing starts with internalizing that truth." The sessions were hard, harder than facing my mother in her kitchen, harder than testifying at the trial, harder than any of the concrete actions I'd taken, because therapy required me to sit with feelings I'd been avoiding: grief for the mother I'd never had, anger at the childhood I'd been denied, fear that I was somehow broken by what had happened, that I'd never be able to trust anyone again. Dr. Chen taught me that trauma doesn't break you, it changes you, and that change can be growth if you let it. She taught me that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect, that cutting off toxic family isn't betrayal, it's survival, that I had the right to choose who got access to my life based on how they treated me, not based on shared DNA. Healing isn't about forgiveness, she told me during one session, it's about releasing the hold that the trauma has on you. It's about building a life where what happened to you is part of your story, but not the defining chapter. It's about recognizing that you survived something designed to kill you, and that survival is its own victory, whether or not the people who hurt you ever acknowledge what they did. I celebrated my 30th birthday in my new apartment surrounded by chosen family. Marcus was there, and coworkers who'd become friends, and my father's relatives who'd reconnected, and a few people from my therapy group who understood what it meant to rebuild after family destruction. We ate cake and told stories and laughed, and for the first time in my entire life I felt safe at a celebration. Felt like the people around me actually wanted to be there, actually cared about me, actually saw me as someone worth celebrating rather than someone worth tolerating. This is what family should feel like, I said to Marcus as we cleaned up afterward, this feeling of being seen and valued and safe. I never had this growing up, never understood that family was supposed to make you feel better, not worse. And he'd smiled and said, "You built this, Rachel. You chose these people. You created the family you needed when the one you were born into failed you. That's not a small thing, that's everything." The nightmares faded slowly, stopped waking me up at 3:17 every morning in a panic, stopped making me smell smoke that wasn't there, stopped replaying the moment I'd realized my apartment was burning and I had seconds to escape. Dr. Chen said that was normal, said that trauma responses diminish when you feel safe, when you've processed the experience, when you've externalized the threat and established boundaries. But there were still nights I'd wake up and check the smoke detectors, still moments I'd smell something burning and my heart would race. Still times I'd see my mother's face in a crowd and my whole body would go cold before I realized it was a stranger, just someone who looked similar, just a trick of memory and fear. The Fire Investigator, Marcus Webb, became someone I considered a friend. We'd meet for coffee every few months. He'd update me on other cases he was working, other families destroyed by greed, other fires set for insurance money, other daughters and sons who'd barely escaped with their lives. "You probably saved more people than just yourself," he told me once. "Your case got a lot of publicity. A lot of people in similar situations saw what happened to you and started asking questions about their own families, started investigating their own suspicions. We've had 4 other cases this year where adult children reported their parents for insurance fraud. For families that might have succeeded in their plans if your story hadn't been so public, if people hadn't learned that this kind of evil is possible, is real, is something that happens." I thought about that a lot, about whether my trauma had meaning beyond my own survival, whether the publicity, the trial, the news coverage that had made me want to hide, had actually served a purpose, had actually protected people I'd never meet, had actually made it harder for other parents to see their children as acceptable losses in their financial schemes. And I decided that if even one person had been saved because they'd heard my story and recognized the pattern, then every uncomfortable moment of exposure had been worth it. Every journalist's question, every courtroom testimony, every detail that became public record, all of it worth it if it meant someone else escaped the fire their family set. My new apartment had a balcony, small but mine, and I'd sit there in the evenings watching the city lights and thinking about how different my life was now compared to 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I'd been living in an apartment I loved, surrounded by things that mattered. Believing my mother was just distant and difficult but not dangerous, believing that family meant something even when it felt hollow, believing that I owed loyalty to people who'd raised me regardless of how they treated me. And then I'd woken up at 3:17 to smoke and flames and the realization that everything I believed was wrong, that the people I trusted most had tried to kill me, that I'd been living next to a bomb they'd planted, waiting for it to detonate. And now here I was, alive, safe, surrounded by real family I'd chosen, working a job I loved, building a life that belonged entirely to me, no debt to people who'd burn it down, no obligation to maintain relationships that only flowed one direction, no requirement to forgive the unforgivable just because we shared blood. The mail brought another letter 6 months later, this time from Gerald, his handwriting messier than my mother's, less controlled. Dear Rachel, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know what we did was wrong, but I need you to understand that your mother pressured me into it. The gambling was my fault, but the plan was hers. She's the one who came up with forging the insurance papers. She's the one who contacted Corso. She's the one who set the timer. I went along with it. Because I was scared, because I didn't know what else to do. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but you have to know I never wanted you to get hurt. I thought you'd escape. I thought it would be fine. Please write back. Please tell me you understand. I can't do this time knowing you hate me, knowing you think I'm a monster. I read it once and threw it away, didn't even consider responding, didn't waste energy on explaining that being pressured doesn't excuse attempted murder, that going along with a plan to kill someone is still choosing to participate in murder, that thinking I'd escape doesn't make setting the fire acceptable, that his guilt was about his comfort in prison, not about my trauma, not about real remorse, just about wanting me to absolve him so he could sleep better at night, and I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't give him that peace. Wouldn't tell him it was okay because it wasn't okay, would never be okay, would never be anything except attempted murder that failed because I woke up 30 seconds before it was too late. I blocked the prison mail again, made sure no more letters could reach me, and I moved forward, kept building, kept healing, kept living the life they tried to take from me. And every day I woke up safe in my apartment with its smoke detectors that actually worked, with its locks that kept out danger, with its space that belonged only to me, was a victory, was proof that they'd failed, was evidence that you can survive your family trying to kill you and come out stronger, wiser, freer on the other side. 2 years after the fire, I was sitting in my apartment drinking morning coffee when the news alert came through on my phone. Patricia Miller, convicted of attempted murder and arson, found dead in prison infirmary, apparent heart attack, age 58. I stared at the words for a long time, waiting to feel something, grief maybe, or relief, or satisfaction, or any of the emotions you're supposed to feel when a parent dies. But all I felt was empty, hollow, like someone had told me a stranger had died, someone I'd heard about but never actually known, because the truth was I had known my mother, not really. I'd known the performance she gave, the mask she wore, the character she played, but the woman underneath, the woman who could forge signatures and plant timer devices and scream that her daughter should have burned. That woman was a stranger, had always been a stranger, and now she was a dead stranger, and I felt nothing. I didn't go to the funeral. Gerald's family planned it. Some distant cousins who felt obligated despite everything, and they sent me an invitation with a handwritten note saying, "We understand if you don't want to come, but we thought you should know," and I'd sent back a brief email saying, "Thank you for letting me know. I won't be attending. Please respect my decision, and don't contact me again." I spent the day of her funeral at the cemetery where my father was buried, my real father, the man who'd given me a guitar and taught me to play and died when I was 17, leaving me alone with a stepmother who would eventually try to kill me. I sat by his grave and told him everything, told him about the fire and the trial and the conviction, told him about the 2 years of therapy and healing, told him about the family I'd built from people who actually cared. "I think you'd be proud of me," I said to the headstone. "I survived her. I survived what she tried to do, and I'm okay now. I'm actually okay. And I hope wherever you are you know that I didn't let her break me. I didn't let her win." The insurance fraud case made national news. My story became a cautionary tale, a viral moment. The daughter who survived her mother's murder plot and wore a wire to get justice. I did 3 interviews, carefully selected media outlets that I trusted to tell the story accurately, and each time I said the same thing: if you feel unsafe in your family, if something feels wrong, if people who are supposed to love you treat you like you're disposable, trust your instincts, document everything, get Help, because abuse doesn't stop on its own, and sometimes the only way to survive is to fight back. And I got hundreds of messages from people who'd recognized their own families in my story, who'd started asking questions, who'd discovered their own parents had taken out life insurance policies without consent, had changed beneficiaries without permission, had made plans that put their children at risk. And some of them had gone to authorities, had started investigations, had stopped crimes before they could happen, and knowing that made everything I'd been through feel purposeful, feel like it mattered beyond just my survival. Marcus got married that year, asked me to be in the wedding party, and I stood up there watching him marry someone who made him happy, someone who valued him, someone who'd chosen him the same way I'd chosen my found family, and during the reception, he pulled me aside and said thank you for trusting me that morning, for letting me help you, for showing me what real courage looks like. You changed my life, Rachel. You showed me that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard, and I'd hugged him and said you saved my life, literally saved it by pulling over that morning, by offering me your spare room, by never once making me feel like I was a burden. You're the family I chose, and I'm so glad I found you. And we'd both cried a little, happy tears this time, tears that weren't about trauma but about connection, about finding people who see you and value you and stick around when things get hard. Dr. Chun and I terminated therapy after 3 years. Not because I was fixed. She explained that healing isn't about being fixed. It's about developing tools to manage the ongoing impacts of trauma, but because I'd reached a place where I didn't need weekly sessions anymore, where I had healthy coping mechanisms, where I could navigate triggers without falling apart, where I'd built a life that felt safe and stable and mine. You've done remarkable work, she said in our final session. You came in believing you were broken, and you're leaving understanding that you were never broken. You were injured by people who should have protected you, and you healed yourself. You built boundaries, you chose safety, you created the life you deserved, and that's not something everyone can do. That's strength, Rachel, real strength. I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, working with women and men who were trying to escape abusive family situations, who were trapped by people who claimed to love them while hurting them, who couldn't see a way out because abuse makes you believe there is no out. I shared my story carefully, professionally, not making it about me, but showing them that escape is possible, that you can survive people who want you dead, that setting boundaries isn't betrayal, that choosing yourself over family isn't selfish, it's necessary. And I watched people transform, watched them go from believing they deserved abuse to understanding they deserve safety, watched them build exit plans and file restraining orders and testify in court, watched them become survivors instead of victims, and it felt like taking my trauma and turning it into something useful, something that helped people, something that mattered. Gerald died in prison 4 years into his sentence. Massive stroke, sudden and unexpected, and this time I felt something, not grief but a kind of grim satisfaction, justice delivered by biology instead of by law. He'd gotten 4 years of consequences before his body gave out, for years of understanding what it felt like to be trapped, to be powerless, to be at the mercy of systems that didn't care about your comfort. And while I would have preferred he served his full sentence, preferred he had more years to think about what he'd done, I accepted that 4 years was what the universe decided he deserved. I didn't go to his funeral either, didn't acknowledge his death beyond noting it, filed it away as the closing of a chapter I'd already finished writing. The building where my apartment burned down was renovated, turned into condos, expensive ones with modern fixtures and balconies and no memory of what had happened there. I drove past it sometimes, not obsessively but occasionally, just to see, just to remember, just to acknowledge that yes, this really happened. This is where I almost died. This is where my life divided into before and after. Unit 4B was now someone's expensive condo, someone who probably had no idea that 2 years ago this space had been filled with smoke and flames, that someone had run for their life down those stairs, that a crime had happened here, and I was okay with that, okay with the building moving on, okay with new people making new memories in space that had held my trauma, because that's what healing looks like. The world moves on, the places that hurt you become just places and you move on to, build new spaces, new memories, new life. I bought my own place eventually, a small house with a yard, nothing fancy but mine, fully mine, no landlord, no shared walls, no memories except the ones I was creating. I installed the best smoke detectors money could buy, the kind that connect to your phone, that alert you immediately, that have backup batteries and redundant systems. I installed a security system with cameras, with motion sensors, With alerts for every door and window, I made my space as safe as humanly possible because safety mattered now in a way it never had before, because I'd learned that danger can come from anywhere, even from family, especially from family, and I would never again assume that just because someone claimed to love me, they wouldn't hurt me. The guitar I'd bought after the fire became my therapy in ways Dr. Chin couldn't be. I'd play for hours, learning new songs, writing my own, pouring everything I couldn't say into music, into chords and melodies that expressed what words couldn't, grief and anger and survival and hope all mixed together into something that sounded like healing. I posted some of my songs online. Nothing professional, just recordings from my living room, and people responded, people who'd been through their own traumas, their own betrayals, their own fires, telling me that my music helped them feel less alone, helped them understand their own experiences, helped them believe they could survive too, and that feedback, that connection with strangers who understood, became its own kind of family, proof that trauma doesn't have to isolate you, that sharing your story can build bridges instead of walls. 5 years after the fire, I was living a life I never could have imagined when I was standing on that curb at dawn. I had a career I loved, a house I owned, friends who were family, hobbies that brought me joy. I was dating someone kind, someone who knew my whole story and didn't run, didn't see me as damaged, just saw me as someone who'd survived something terrible and come out stronger, someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a future with. And when he asked me what I wanted from life, what my dreams were now, I told him I want to feel safe. I want to build things that can't be burned down. I want to help other people escape their fires, and I want to never, ever doubt my worth again, because the people who tried to kill me taught me that I'm worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth choosing over anyone who asks me to sacrifice my safety for their benefit. I went back to the cemetery where my father was buried on what would have been his 65th birthday, brought flowers, sat on the grass beside his headstone like I had 5 years ago, told him about my life, about the house, about the relationship, about the volunteer work, about the music, about everything I'd built from the ashes of what his widow had tried to destroy. I made it, Dad, I said quietly. I survived her. I survived everything she did, and I built a life that's actually mine. A life where I'm safe, where I'm valued, where I don't have to earn love by being useful or quiet or convenient. I found people who see me and choose me and stick around, and I finally understand what you meant when you used to say that family is supposed to make you stronger, not smaller. You were right, and I'm sorry I didn't get to keep the family you gave me, but I built a new one, a better one, and I think you'd like them. I think you'd be proud of who I became after everything fell apart. The smoke smell never completely left my memory. I could still call it up if I tried, still remember exactly what it tasted like, what it felt like burning in my lungs, what it meant when I first woke up to it. But it didn't haunt me anymore, didn't wake me up at night, didn't make me panic when someone burned toast. It was just a memory now, filed away with all the other evidence of what happened, what I survived, what I overcame, and that's what healing looks like, I realized, not forgetting. Not pretending it didn't happen, but integrating it into your story in a way that doesn't control you, doesn't define you, doesn't limit what you can become. So here's what I want you to understand if you're watching this. If you're in a family that treats you like you're disposable, if you have parents who see you as a resource instead of a person, if something feels wrong in a way you can't quite articulate, trust yourself, document everything, build your exit plan, find people who will believe you, get help from professionals who understand that family abuse is real, is common, is something that happens to people who did nothing wrong. You didn't. 'Cause you don't deserve it. And you're allowed to save yourself even if it means cutting off everyone who shares your DNA. Blood doesn't create obligation, love does. And if the people who claim to love you are hurting you, they've already severed the bond. You're just acknowledging what they did. I'm Rachel Miller, I'm 34 years old, and 5 years ago my mother tried to burn me alive for insurance money. She failed because I woke up 30 seconds before the smoke could kill me. She failed because I fought back instead of accepting her story. She failed because I found people who believed me and helped me get justice. She failed because I refused to die conveniently, and every day I'm alive. Every day I'm building this life that's mine. Every day I'm helping other people escape. Their fires is proof that she failed, is proof that attempting to murder your daughter doesn't work out the way you planned when your daughter is stubborn enough to survive and strong enough to fight back. My mother died in prison believing she was the victim, believing I'd wronged her, believing her plan would have worked if I'd just stayed asleep like I was supposed to, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with her never understanding, never apologizing, never showing real remorse, because I don't need her acknowledgement to validate my experience. I don't need her apology to heal. I don't need anything from her because she's dead, and I'm alive, and that's all the justice I need. If this story helped you tonight, if you saw yourself in any part of it, if you needed to hear that you can survive your family trying to destroy you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me you understand. You survived. You're still fighting because we're not alone in this. There are thousands of us, maybe millions, people who had to choose between family loyalty and survival, who had to cut ties to stay safe, who had to become their own family, because the one they were born into failed them, and every time we share our stories, we make it a little bit easier for the next person to recognize what's happening, to trust their instincts, to get out before it's too late, before the fire starts, before the smoke fills their lungs, before they're standing on a curb at dawn with nothing but a phone, and the realization that the people who were supposed to love them wanted them dead. And if you want more stories like this, stories about people who survived impossible situations and came out stronger, check the description below. We're building a community of survivors here, a chosen family of people who understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from blood relatives who treat you like you're disposable. So subscribe, share, comment, and know that whatever you're going through, whatever family nightmare you're surviving, you're not alone, you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you deserve safety. You deserve people who choose you. You deserve a life where you don't have to sleep with one eye open wondering if the people who raised you are planning your destruction. You deserve everything I found after I escaped, and I'm here telling you it's possible, it's real, and you can have it too if you're brave enough to save yourself.